Good morning. Welcome to Sunday School at Mount Harmony this morning. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I don't know if you're watching it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, but I appreciate the time that you've set aside to watch it. And I do appreciate that the prayers of each of you. It's a trying time, and we all know that. We're going to get through this. I had a gentleman in my store this week, and he told me 2 different times before he left. He said, "Jonathan, I've read the back and we win." And he's absolutely right. So we do need to keep that in mind. It's trying times, but humanity has been through trying times before. This country has been through trying times before. And some way at some time, it's going to be okay. So I do want to just say that. We do need to keep that in mind. We need to keep that in mind with our children as school comes up. And we're going to be okay. Things are going to look different, and we're going to do things different ways, but we're going to be okay. God will take care of us. He'll take care of His people, whether it be here or somewhere else. God's going to take care of us. And I just want to at least say that. All right, if you got your Bibles this morning, we're going to look at the book of Daniel. And I'll give you some time to be flipping over there, but the book of Daniel, and the title of our lesson today is Counterculture Living. Now, when we talk about countercultural, what we want to say is we're going to go against the flow. Okay? I've never been a big kayaker or canoeer. We've done it a few times and I've had a good time, but we've always went with the current because it's easier. You don't want to paddle back upstream. You want to paddle with the current because it flows easier. And what we're going to look at today is some young men that they decided that even though it would be easier to go with the current, that's not what they needed to do. And it's always important, and I've said this week after week, it's always important not just to know these stories, whether it be Old Testament or New Testament. It's not just enough to know the story, but we need to be able to apply this and say, hey, what can I do with this story for me? It's not just enough for me to say, hey, this is something that happened nearly 3,000 years ago, but what can I do in the year 2020? How does that affect me? And we're going to see that when we serve God, the Bible tells us that we'll become a peculiar people. He sets us apart. And we're supposed to be different. And when you're different, well, you have to do things different. And sometimes you'll have to paddle against the stream. You'll have to swim against the current. And that's where we're going to start today. We're going to look in Daniel chapter 1. We're really going to read the whole chapter. Now, I'm going to butcher some names, and I don't get too upset about that, and I hope you don't. And if you're really one of those that wants to be a stickler on how they're pronounced, well, you come up here next week, and I'll let you pronounce them. But we're going to do the best we can on some of these names, and we're going to say them with my Lamar County English, and we'll move on. But what we want to see is this is a time where Judah, the southern 2 tribes, all that's left of the nation of Israel, Israel's been gone. The northern 10 tribes, they've been in Assyrian captivity for a long time. The southern 2 tribes hang on for a long time. In the year 606, 605, Babylon shows up and they take exiles. Now, Daniel will be in this group. And the exiles, we kind of need to talk for a minute about what that was. When the Babylonians show up and they defeat Judah, they take, and I want to be careful how I word this, but they take the most educated. They take the most talented. You want to say they took the best and brightest, but we want to be careful how we word that, but that's kind of what they did. They took the best artisans. They took the best goldsmiths and silversmiths and stone layers and iron workers. And then they took the most educated and that's what they did. Now, the Babylonians were very smart because they would take these people and they would go and use them for the continuing advancement of their civilization. You can say, well, that sounds terrible, but we've kind of done that in this country, and in particular since World War II. We may not want to admit that, but there's a lot of German names on buildings in Huntsville, Alabama that was not there in the 1930s that's there now. And that's because we brought those scientists here and we put a man on the moon because of those scientists. We took those men and their minds, and we brought them here, and it advanced our civilization. Now, our nation has also done that through our educational system. We've brought the best minds from around the world for the last 70 to 80 years here, and it has advanced our nation economically in all kind of areas, from engineering to medicine to whatever, because we've utilized the entire planet's brain power as opposed to just ours. Well, if you go back to 3,000 years ago, the Babylonians, they were ahead of the curve. They realized this. They also realized that their empire was growing, and it was already large. And they needed administrators to administer and to manage and to govern their empire. So, what better way to do it, what better way to manage these Jews than to have a Jew of their nation that understood your system to be there, because he was multicultural. He understood the Chaldean system, Babylonians, and he also understood the Jewish system. That would be very valuable, because he could cross the two worlds and be an effective tool for both. And that's what they did. Now, Jerusalem will be, or Judah will be, kind of ravaged in three different series here. We've got 606, 605 when we fall the first time. From that point on, they're just a vassal. 7 or 8 years later, there's a king that kind of rebels. He goes into captivity, and they take more exiles. And then in 586, which is what we was talking about the last couple of weeks for some of our minor prophets, that's when the Babylonians show up and totally destroy Jerusalem. They tear down the wall, tear down the temple. They do that type of thing. Now, Judah is just defeated, and it's set up as a vassal state, but we take some of these educated young men. Now, they take these men, and we're going to begin in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Nebuchadnezzar showed up, but he sent his army. And they besieged it, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, unto the hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shamar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Now, this was very important at the time, because remember, all these people in these societies, except for the Jews, are polytheistic. Now, what that would mean is I would have a lot of gods, and I prayed to all of these gods, and if my nation conquered your nation, I believed that my gods, take your pick, were superior to your gods, even though I might adopt some of your gods. Okay? But it gave them the belief that their God was superior, gods were superior. Now, we need to keep this in mind, why Judah was allowed to fall into Babylonian captivity. God did not lose a battle with their false gods. God did not have to submit to their false gods. God allowed it to happen. God used the Babylonians he used them to carry out his punishment. So it wasn't that our God, their God, the Jewish God, was weak and couldn't defend his people. It was the fact that he used these people to correct his people. Okay? Now, we also need to understand that there were promises that God had made. If you follow me and you do this, I will do this for you. But if you don't do this, and they didn't follow him, if you turn from me, then I will do these things. But remember, all of these things that God did, and even the punishments of Judah and of Israel, was to bring them back. It was always in an effort to restore them. Just like we would as a parent. When our child does something, we don't discard them and throw them away. They're still our children. And when we punish them, it's with an effort to bring them back. It's to restore them. That's where we're at today. Now, this is a hard punishment, okay? And their actions have required a harsh punishment. But it's still, God is setting up a way for them to come back. He's setting up a way for them to be restored later. Now, so we have Jerusalem has fallen, verse 1 and verse 2, to King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. The things out of the treasure house and out of God's house has been taken. And then we see in verse 3, And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning of knowledge, and understanding science, and such had ability to them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning of the tongue of the Chaldeans. So, just like we discussed earlier, he said, listen, I want you to go get the most educated they have. All right? Now, we need to look at the Babylonians in a little different light than we looked at the Assyrians. The Babylonians looked at these people and said, you know what? There is a chance, even though we have conquered them, there's a chance they've got something that we might need. There's a chance that we could learn something from these people. There's a chance that we could develop our ideas with what they have. And that's what they're doing here. So he says, bring me these people that we can use what they already know, teach them what we know, and see if we can meld them together and make them something usable for us. Okay, it was very self-serving on the Babylonians' part, but it was very effective. We move on to verse 5. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, then at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, we're kind of familiar with this story where the king supplies their needs, because at the end of this 3 years, now you say, well, 3 years is a long time, but you know, this is a pretty intense training program, and they've got to master a new culture and a new language. Now think about this. Any of you that's ever been on a major college, how many foreign students are there? And there's cultural differences and there's language differences. Or if you've been on a major university and you've had to deal with that as they're the teacher and you're trying to assimilate into that. That's what these men are facing. This is a very intense, high pressure learning course. But we also have to realize that for a captive person, where your nation is basically being enslaved, your life's not too bad here. It says that you're eating what the king's eating, basically, and that you're being treated pretty well. You're getting a fantastic education, because not only are they taking care of you now, they plan on using you in a government administrative role. Okay? So, as far as to be a captive, your lot in life is not bad. But it's very intense. And then notice at the end it says that they would stand before the king. It sounds as if the king himself is going to make sure that they're worthy and we're ready to go into his service at the end of this 3 years. Now, let's continue on to verse 6. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, and let me just go ahead and say this, because we're way more accustomed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So let me go ahead and tell you their Chaldean name, their Babylonian name, instead of their Hebrew name. Now, when I was in school, I was there with some people, they were Asian, and they would say, what's your name? And they would give a name, and they'd say, no, what's your real name, not your American name. So that's what this is. They would have a name that I could pronounce, and then they had their name that they would use in their home language or at home. So that's what's going on here. So we've got Daniel and the three friends. In verse 7, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs, names given them, and then we get Daniel became Belshazzar, and then we get their name Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay? So they're renamed. And this is where we're going to begin, and we're going to see that their job now, they've got a full-time 3-year job to assimilate into Babylonian culture, learn as much as they can, learn the language. Now, what we want to see, because, again, it's not just enough to know the story. We need to be able to apply this in Haitogi in 2020, is that the world assumes it can acclimate us into their system. Okay? And we're going to see that these young men say, you know what? I'm here and I cannot control that. I am a captive and I cannot control that. I am put in this service and I cannot control that. But the things I can control, I'm going to control, and I'm going to serve God. Even with all that's going on, I'm going to serve God. Okay? And we need to look at that then and say, well, I think an application here is, I'm in high school, I'm in college, I'm at work, I'm wherever I am, and I may not be able to control those circumstances, but I can control how I act and how I think and how I react and how I worship and you see what we're saying? That's what we want to say. We understand that there's some things beyond our control. But we also understand that no matter what the circumstance, there's things within our control. And that's what we're going to see, and that's the reason we're reading about these gentlemen 3,000 years later, nearly 3,000 years later. Now, let's continue on. Let's look at our second section, and that is honor God by choosing what pleases Him rather than following the ways of a lost culture. And we're going to look at verses 8 through 16. In verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, what's wrong with the food and what they're given to drink? I don't really know. We can do some speculating. Maybe it was against their the Jewish dietary custom. Maybe it had been offered out. We really don't know. But the fact is, whatever it was, Daniel said, you know what, I'm not supposed to have it. Okay? So it really doesn't matter what the problem was. To Daniel, Daniel saw it as a sin, and he said, I don't need to do it. That's what counts. Because it was an offense to David, because he thought it was an offense to God. So from there, he goes to the person that's over him. And he says, verse 9, now God hath brought Daniel into favor and to tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear, my lord, the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for he should see your face worse likening to the children which are of your sort. Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. So I skipped, I'm sorry. Daniel went to the prince of the eunuchs and said, listen, I don't need to eat this, and I don't need to drink this. Can I have something else? Okay? And it says that the person that's over him tells him, says, listen, Daniel, I like you. I like you a lot. But here's the problem. I've been assigned a job to make sure that you look pleasing to the king. Because remember, the king has invested a lot in these young men. And it's not just Jews that are there. We need to keep that in mind. It's every culture they have been conquering. Those people are there and being students. They're going through this program. And he says, listen, if you look any worse than the rest of the Hebrews, I could lose my life. Okay? Now, that's a little different saying, now listen, I could get written up if this don't go right, Ben. Okay? He said, I could lose my life. That's a big deal. So when Daniel presents this proposition to this man, and he says, I would like to eat something else, it sounds so easy, but if you're the man in control, this is not an easy request. This is a big thing that this man, it's up to him to decide. Remember, it's not Daniel's choice. Okay? Daniel didn't say, I ain't eating it, and I'll burn the buildings down. That's not what he said, because it wasn't in Daniel's control. It was in this man's control. And the man says, Daniel, I'm kind of afraid. This could be serious for me. And then he goes on, and Daniel... then said Daniel to Melzar, who was the prince of the eunuchs, had set over Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and he said, prove thy servants, and I beseech ye 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. So what Daniel does is he kind of bargains with him, because Daniel is in no place or no situation or no circumstance to be able to make demands. So what he says was, I tell you what, because remember, the guy likes him. He said, I tell you what, let's go 10 days, okay? Remember, we're going to be here 3 years. He said, but let's go 10 days. And if I look different, or my 3 friends look different in 10 days, we'll do it your way, okay? Now, notice Daniel is, and I might have said David. If I did, I'm sorry, it's Daniel. Daniel is trying to be appeasing because Daniel has no authority to make these decisions. He's requesting, okay? And he requests that, and let's look and see what he says. Verse 13, Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest it, deal with thy servants. So Daniel says, he really points out the fact that the man already knows, it's not up to me. But you give us 10 days, and if I look, or these my 3 friends look any different than the rest of them, then we'll do it your way. And and the man's probably shaking his head like, yeah, you sure will. Okay. Verse 14. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And then at the end of 10 days their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which he did eat of the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and their wine, that they should eat and drink, and gave them pulse. So, because Daniel had found favor in this man's eyes, because Daniel acted like a Christian's supposed to act, okay? Remember, Daniel got there, and no doubt, in spite of, he's probably homesick, he's probably never going to see his parents again. He's probably never going to see any of his family again. He's got these people. We don't really know who all else is with him. Does he even know these 3 people that's with him? They've made a friendship somewhere along the way, but how long has he known them? Is this the only friends he has there because of his beliefs? There's some things we don't know, but we do see that in spite of how challenging this is for these young men, they've done everything they're supposed to do. They've shown up every day and worked hard. They've learned, they've read, they've studied. They're doing everything they're supposed to. So that when they went and made this request, this man honored their request, not because he was a kind-hearted, loving man. He did it because he appreciated what these men were doing. You know what? We recognize hard work. You can go somewhere and you can sit in a restaurant and it's busy and you look and you see pretty quick that person's working themselves to death. That person's getting after it. I hope that's not my person. We see it. All right? Well, we see it in others. We don't always see it in us. But are we that person at work? Do we do what we're supposed to do? Do we do it the right way? Do we do it not without begrudging it? Do we do it to the best of our ability? These men were doing it, and it made an impact on the person over them, and he allowed them to do their request for a time because of his respect for how they're working. Now, you know what? This man that's over them has no connection to them whatever, other than he sees them every day. He has no connection to their God whatsoever. Okay? We don't know if he ever accepted Jehovah God as his God. There's no way of knowing it. But you know what? He had 4 men every day that left an impression on him. Sometimes that's all we can do. Are we being every day what we need to be? And I know this story is about Daniel, but Daniel made an impression because Daniel was doing it the right way. He was swimming against the current the right way. That's what we need to be doing. We need to swim against the culture in the right way, the way that's pleasing to God, that makes people say they're different in a good way. Okay, let's move on to our last section. God will use us for His glory when we put Him first in our lives, 17 through 21. 17, and as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. That'll be a big deal later. But right now, we're going to see that God blessed these men, and He helped them understand. Okay? Sometimes we pick stuff up and it's easy. And sometimes you get it and it's like, I don't understand it. Okay? And just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you're dumb. You just don't understand that. We want everybody to understand that statement. But God allowed these young men to thrive in this learning environment. And they excelled. And their work ethic and the fact that they were excelling made everyone in that program their own people, their own Jews that are captives too. They had to notice it. They have to sit there and say, there's the top of the class. There's those 4. There's the rest of us. But also those that are over the program, those that the king is reporting to the king. Hey, how are those Jews doing? Hey, listen, I got 4 that's going to make it. You can do something with them. Okay? That's where they're at. And it says that they have knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom. You know what? They were smart. But they tried, and God rewarded their efforts. We move on. 18. Now at the end of the days that the king had said that they should bring them in, and the princes of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. This is a tough test, guys. Okay? Imagine what that's like. You've been there 3 years, so you've become somewhat comfortable in your surroundings and in your environment. And you're understanding, and you have understanding of the new culture you're immersed in. But now they bring you before the king, and he's going to decide if you're competent or not. I don't know what he asked them. I don't know if he asked them anything. Did he just walk by and stare at them? Did he grunt? Did he ask questions? I don't know. But they had to appear before the king. And they come before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and he spoke with them. And among them all, and found none like Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Now, what that means was that they stood with him is when he had a problem, and he said, what do y'all think? Okay. Now the king, I wasn't there, obviously, but this is how this is going to work. The king's presented with a problem, and it's up to him to make the decision. And he turns to his counselors, and he says, what do y'all think? And he listens to all sides of the arguments, and then he makes his minds up and gives the decree. But notice what he says here. He says, my goodness, these 4 is better than anything I've got. Why am I feeding the rest of them? How much do I pay that guy? I'll just keep these 4. Okay? Notice what God did with 4 people that were in bondage. They're standing before the king. The king listens to them. You know what? We're going to keep reading about Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar is going to lose his kingdom, and we understand all that. And we understand that Nebuchadnezzar probably died lost. Okay? But do you understand that God put 4 Christians with him? And whether he wanted to admit it or not, he listened to what they said. And we see here that he respected their thoughts. So they were intimate with him, as anybody could be. God will reward us for being a servant of his. That doesn't mean it's health, wealth, and fame. It doesn't mean you're going to be popular for everything you do. But God recognizes when you're working hard for him. God wants you to do it for him in the right way. These 4 men were humble in their request. They worked hard. All we can do is all we can do. I can't control how other people act. All I can control is how I react. Now, verse 21, and Daniel continued even until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Daniel continued about 70 years and made it to the next civilization. He made it into the reign of the Medes and Persians. How can basically what is a slave at this point, how can he become so powerful and have the ear of the king? Because of God. Now, we're probably not going to be in that position. I hope we're never captives. But God can use us if we will allow him to, and we behave in a way that is pleasing to him. And we mind ourselves in a way that reflects who and what God is for us. Guys, thank you. I want to thank you again for watching these videos. I want to encourage you again to know, as my friend told me, he's read the back of the book, and we win. We win. If we have associated ourselves with Jesus Christ, we win. He comes back as a conquering king, and we win. And I'm going to keep saying it a couple more times. We win. No matter what it looks like right now, or what next week looks like, or next month, or next year, as a Christian, we win. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.